this equation where we're trying to figure out exactly how to fuel for a session, for a long time we've got that wrong. Like I came from an era of doing, you know, Michael Barry coached me in Sky when he was in Sky, and I was coming up through a French team, and I didn't get much nutrition guidance from Mike, but I did inherit his habits. So if it was like a 2-hour ride, I'd ride 1 hour to the calf, have something at the calf. If it was a 7-hour ride, I'd ride 3.5 hours to the calf, and I'd eat at the calf. Probably wouldn't eat for the rest of the session. What do we know of the dangers of chronically underfueling now that we didn't know then?
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, but from both male and female athletes, there are some serious metabolic implications of, I would say, not just underfueling on an absolute level in terms of consuming less energy in the day, but actually when we start to look at the distribution of it throughout the course of the day as well, you can cause this additional stress where, let's say you have significant hours, let's call it like 6+ hours of being in this chronic deficit where your body is not necessarily getting enough fuel to maintain normal physiological processes. I think that's the first thing we'd look at is your body works off this law of preservation. So if we don't have enough energy to sustain what we're doing, we'll start to shut off other processes. Okay. So when we get into that area where we're chronically underfueling, our body doesn't have a choice but to try find a way to preserve energy. You know, female athletes will experience it, you know, very often by losing their menstrual cycle. The body will go, I don't have enough energy. This is one of the processes that I can conserve energy on. And again, that's a really unfortunate situation that a lot of female athletes find themselves in, often through misinformation online, maybe bad advice from a coach, or trying to adhere to something that they see on social media, as opposed to understanding, I would say, one, fundamentally that every athlete is unique. So everyone has their own individual requirements. Every day can be different. So how you eat today, and this is another huge problem that we see. A lot of people who are trying to lose weight or manage body weight will go, well, I'm going to eat 2,500 calories today. Yeah. I'm going to eat 3,000 calories today. That's my goal. But today you could go out for a 4-hour ride. Your on-bike energy expenditure could be 2,000 calories. Tomorrow you could be at a day of complete rest. So you need to start to understand that your fueling should adjust and your overall nutrition plan and structure should adjust day by day and meal by meal in line with the demands of your activity.
But what I noticed using Hexus was, and this mightn't be how it's working, I felt it was almost working on a 2-meal cycle. So if I had a big session on Sunday morning, I was having a bigger breakfast than I was usually. I was using the shout out to Alan Murchison, has that amazing pancake recipe in the Cycling Chef book.
Okay.
3 of those pancakes in the morning, unreal. But I was having 3 of those pancakes, which he almost explicitly warns against. He's like, if it's a big day, you're having 3 of these pancakes. I was routinely having 3 of these pancakes for a 4-hour endurance ride, but I was also having a bigger dinner than I normally would on Saturday night. It seemed like it was disregarding as important as we think a calendar day is, and we think the day ends here, that's the end of today, now I start thinking about eating for tomorrow. Hexus seemed like it was cycling it back 2 meals for me. So I was overeating compared to what I was used to Saturday night, overeating compared to what I was used to Sunday morning. But then the surprising thing for me was Sunday evening, I was eating very little because I had Monday as a total day off activity.
For us at Hexus, the whole thing really cycles around this concept of periodizing your intake in line with the demands of your activity. So what we'll look at is, we'll look at your own physical profile, your own lifestyle, and your own unique needs. Then we'll look at, as we said before, the type, the intensity, the duration of the activity. And if you have more information, such as what that predicted average power will be, again, all of that is really useful to get an understanding of what your body is preparing for. And one of our big goals, and again, coming from my own research background, one of my big motivations was, how can we use your data to help you understand what to do next? As opposed to just being a tracker where you'd say, I would say, okay, here's what I've done, here's how many calories, etc. We're in that. So we wanted to say, make that data work harder. You're going to go out on the bike. It's about feeling good. And when you have that session where you're able to produce what you want to produce and you feel you're capable of, how can we replicate that? So for us, it was always about taking that training data, then turning that into a predictive, personalized fueling plan. And just rightly, as you said, some sessions, depending on how tough they are, they may require additional fueling. And that additional fueling could start not just a meal before, but multiple meals before, to actually sufficiently top up your muscle glycogen content.
How far back would that go?
So I suppose if we're looking at, let's say, preparing for a race is going to be the ultimate.
Yeah.
So I think that's the extreme scenario where you'll typically see somebody will have to prepare their bodies with a carbohydrate load. That carbohydrate load would typically start the day before. That's sort of 24 to 36 hours before that start, that I suppose the gun goes. And that is enough time to sufficiently top up your muscle glycogen content and your fuel stores to prepare for that race. Now, the amount you need to top up by can vary greatly. So for example, the day before an event, you might be, depending on how long it is, you might top up by 8 to 10 grams per kilo, or you might be as high as 15 to 20 grams per kilo if you've already raced that day. So for example, people who are going in multiple back-to-back stages, you're going to be burning and you're trying to prepare for the next day. I mean, we've seen guys over at the Giro now consuming 22 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram in a single 24-hour period because they're doing that much work and they're getting ready for the next day. So that's what I'd say. First of all, it can vary greatly, but from a training perspective, you typically don't see those massive volumes the day before because, again, you're training to perform, but there's still an adaptation that you're looking to facilitate. It's not about removing all risk from the session. So you might be looking at the evening before where you're specifically topping up because the morning has a big ride and the breakfast is just not going to be enough to get exactly what you want to get into. There's actually, I think this came out yesterday or maybe the day before, one of the EF riders actually has pulled together a vlog on the classics and how he was kind of adjusting his intake before and after.
Harry Sweeney?
Harry Sweeney, that's exactly
what it was.
Good. Yeah. So he was good. He was answering questions on the bike and it was, I personally have never met Harry, but it's also great to see how individual athletes are interacting with the tech. But the same tech those athletes have, everyone can have access to. And again, for us, it's just about tailoring it to that individual profile. Not everyone is doing, like you said, 15 to 20 hours on the bike a week. Some people are doing less and they're, ultimately those absolute numbers are lower and things need to be adjusted down accordingly.
I was listening recently, I have Stephen Barrett on, the coach for Agi Dozer Decathlon or whatever they're calling themselves these days. And Stephen's on, I think, next month. And so he'll be in the hot seat. But I know Sam Bennett is struggling with the new high octane fueling. He's getting GI issues trying to take the 100, 120, 140 grams per hour. Firstly, is that common? Are you seeing that among athletes that maybe some of them are struggling to take that much? And then as a follow-on to that, would you adjust pre-event fueling for an athlete who's struggling to take these new high levels of carbs?
Yeah, so I think if we look at, and again, this is the rider at home and the athlete themselves. I think anyone who's looking at their intra-workout fueling or how much they should take on board during a session, they need to recognize that they can't just go from 30 or 60 grams up to 100, 120.
I was literally puking on the side of the road when I tried beta fuel for the first time.
So your gut is trainable, and you need to start to plan and build these things into your training week. So like we said a little bit earlier about identifying that one session in the week that is most, at a race-like intensity or at the highest intensity, they're great sessions to practice your fueling strategies and try to increase things by 10 grams per hour or another 10 grams per hour and eventually work up towards that tolerance level. So I think, first of all, I'd say part one is recognize that your gut is trainable. You might have in your week something, we'll call it a key performance workout, one where you want to deliver, you want to replicate competition-like intensity. And they're great sessions to try practice that. Then if we look at compensating fueling.
And to just jump in on that one and clarify, so when you say practice that, are you looking at to figure out what your current baseline is and slightly just stretch the baseline each week like you would with a training adaptation?
So I think there's two parts to the answer. I would say start with what you're comfortable with, and then you should be looking at gradually trying to increase that towards, let's say, what that overall optimal recommendation could be for that specific those specific workout demands.
Okay, so you're not just trying to push 140 per hour for the sake of it. It actually has to tie in with the workout.
And I think that, there's some brilliant researchers. Look, I was fortunate enough to do my PhD up in Liverpool, John Moores, with a really strong cohort of practitioners, professors and researchers. One of those guys there, a guy called Dr. Jamie Pugh, who's been on this podcast before.
Yeah, Jamie, good man.
Jamie's doing a brilliant job now at, like anything in sport, quantifying what that is. So I know he's already working with some of the pro and the world tour teams, but for those athletes that are genuinely struggling with figuring out what is best for them, why not measure? I'd be picking up the phone to Jamie and trying to say, well, right, let's come out and let's start to measure these things and build that plan backwards towards what is optimal for me as an individual.
What's actually interesting is with it, because I put out across socials that you were going on the podcast, and a bunch of people had the same question of what's the long tail effect or damage to, like, use the economics word, externality, the unattended consequence of the 120 to 140 grams of carbohydrates per hour. But I actually think a more interesting question is, we've only started fueling like that. We've been fueling wrong for decades. What was the damage of underfueling for so long? Because I got sick so much, and I don't get sick really anymore since I stopped riding 15, 20 hours a week.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. So I think fundamentally, when we look at, let's say, those higher energy intakes on the bike, everything stems back from what are the demands of this session? What is the total energy cost to me across the course of the day? And we discussed the energy components earlier. One that we skipped over is DIT. Even consuming that amount of energy.
What's DIT?
Something called dietary induced thermogenesis.
Okay.
So when we consume food, there's still a cost in our body to digest and assimilate that food. So, when you're going out and you're taking part in this exercise, in particular, the, elite athletes, it could be 6,000, 7,000 calories that they need to take on board just to meet their energy demands. Now, if we look at that and you look at the number of meals in the day and the amount of rice that you can have, and there's only so much opportunity in the day to physically feed. And on bike becomes one of those really important scenarios where you say, well, we can start to better match our energy requirements by fueling at these higher levels because the actual cost is so high. Now, if you're made a really good point, like, what is the risk of underfueling and saying, well, I shouldn't do that, and then just not meeting your overall energy requirements? As soon as you start to fall into those chronic deficits over extended periods of time, you are looking at impaired performance, increased risk of illness, increased risk of injury, maladaptation, and all those negative things that fundamentally you're trying to avoid. So athletes can find themselves in this horrible place of, I feel like I'm putting in all the effort, I'm doing all the work to the best of my ability, but because I haven't got my nutrition right before, during, and after exercise, instead of enhancing what my body can do, I'm actually impairing and dampening what my body is able to do and how it's able to recover and adapt. And you see horror stories. You see some athletes really fall off the edge of a cliff and disappear, for extended periods of time through illness, through preventable injuries because they've got it wrong. One
I've noticed a lot that's started to slightly disappear with the pros is there used to be that old adage, when you're at peak performance, you're basically teetering on a tightrope of overtraining, falling off the edge, getting sick, getting injured. And looking back on that, I was wondering, is that because that's preceding that peak performance is a period of higher than normal training intensity, training duration, and the fueling never adapted to that higher intensity. So now this tightrope they're talking about that they're treading is actually an underfueling tightrope.
I think fueling definitely has a part to play. And I think, when somebody's getting ready to peak, and there may be a few peaks that you're trying to hit and sustain throughout the course of the year, prior to those peaks, you are exposing your body to stress. So if we look at, there's something called general adaptation syndrome, but let's imagine a graph, and let's say baseline is here. When you go and train, you're deliberately going into that bit of a hole where that stress is coming in, and then your recovery protocols, how you fuel after and recover, how you sleep, how you look after your own mental health, etc., they allow you to start to make the most of that stress, and your body starts to adapt to it, and let's say we come out a little bit higher. And that's kind of that step effect where you go down, you come up, and the idea is over time you build up those adaptations so that you're in a position to perform at your peak. And as you've said, let's say it's nutrition as one of those big, big pillars. If you put that stress on your body and you're not getting the fueling for or the recovery from correct, you find yourself working into that hole and never necessarily finding the full way out of it to make the most of that training.
Yeah.
So that's and you look at people, you use the word teetering, who are right on the edge. They've maybe struggled in the past to quantify exactly what the cost was and how they could better match. We've seen advancements in all sorts of tools and technology. People are able to better quantify their sleep. People are able to better quantify the work done on the bike. So now we've seen more of a democratization of previously what maybe only the elites had. Everyone is starting to have access to in their daily lives. And what you used to have to go into a lab to get, you can get in ecologically valid settings where it's now you on your bike with your friends, but still harvesting that same information that can help inform what to do next.
I think a piece amateurs miss that pros definitely have now, and I missed it for a long time, and it was only chatting to Matej Mohoric, and he said it took him 10 years to figure out that the purpose of training is to get an adaptation to get better on race day, not just to train. And it sounds like a very simplistic statement, and it is a very simplistic statement, but a lot of us fall into that trap of just trying to turn boxes green on training peaks, and that becomes a successful week when we should be looking at, did we get an adaptation from that week, not did we complete that week?
Oh, 100%. Like training is obviously a huge component, but it is just not the only component. That training is going to apply that stress, or it's going to give yourself the chance, the opportunity to see what your body can do, see what it can tolerate. You need to then find a way to maximize how it can perform either during that session or recover from the stress of that session. And I often think, nutrition has always been this, I'm losing weight, I'm gaining weight, so I'm using it just to manipulate body composition.
A quick word from today's sponsor. A few years ago, I came out of my local coffee shop after a long winter spin to find my Cafe Lock on the ground, sliced clean in half. My pride and joy bike, it was gone. Just like that, a small fortune in kit, and frankly, part of my identity as a cyclist, it disappeared in seconds. If you've ever had that sick feeling in the pit of your stomach, even imagining your bike getting stolen, wrecked or damaged mid-travel, you know it's not just a possession. It's your freedom, it's your fitness, it's your sanity on tough weeks. That's where BIKMO comes in. Whether it's theft, damage, crashes, racing or travel, BIKMO's got your back. Their in-house claims team makes the process fast and painless. And here's the kicker. With 50% off multi-bike cover, you can protect all your bikes and even your family or your mate's bike under the same policy. No nonsense, no surprises. But BIKMO isn't just about covering bikes. They actually care about the future of cycling itself, and that's why I've partnered with them. If you insure your bike with BIKMO today, they'll donate £10 toward trash-free trails to help clean up and protect our shared cycling spaces. So head on over to BIKMO, BIKMO.com, and use the code ROADMAN to get covered, save money, and support our wild spaces. All that information is in the description below.